How is it that some guitarists with a very simple palette of notes can sound really, really effective, and when us mere mortals try and use the same palette of notes, it ends up sounding like rambling, irrelevant nonsense? Well, it's to do with, basically, how you tell them, and it comes down to phrasing. So let's investigate together and see what we can do to give our phrases a little bit of shape and direction. Now, there are many aspects to phrasing something successfully, but we're going to focus on just one today, and that is the concept of question and answer phrasing. So, what on earth do we mean by that? Well, it almost feels redundant to give examples of this in music, because it was almost certainly in the very last song you listened to, and it will almost certainly be in the very next song you listen to. It's so fundamental, we're almost talking about the very bones of music itself. It's essentially a device where tension is established, which is then resolved. Absolutely all over the place. A lot of guitarists immediately think of this in the context of blues soloing. So think of something like Peter Green's intro solo to Need Your Love So Bad, where we have a question, which is then answered like so. The first phrase finished on a note that wasn't the root note, and then there was a pause, and then there was a phrase that did finish on the root note. So a classic pattern there of establishing tension, which is then resolved. If you're about 3 years old or over, you might recognise this banger. But notice the structure there, it's exactly the same thing. Our first phrase ends on this note that leaves the phrase unresolved. It's like a question that needs answering, which is then answered by a classic resolution on the root note. The tune then continues, again unresolved, and then resolved. So we get a really obvious pattern of a phrase that's unresolved, finishes on a note other than the root note, and then a phrase that resolves by ending on the root note, and then the same again. So we're going to try and apply that to a little backing track that I have here in the key of B minor. So not very Happy Birthday sounding. It goes like this. Like so. So let's see what we can do phrasing wise with this. Alright, so in the context of my backing track here, the root note is B. So that is going to provide me with the full stop at the end of my answer phrases. That's how I'm going to provide resolve. To provide tension, I'm going to follow the Happy Birthday school of soloing, which I suspect it will become known as, and begin with a phrase that ends not on a B, not on a root note. The collection of notes is a bit different. We're obviously dealing with a minor scale here, and obviously there are different degrees of not the root note, and each of them will provide a different kind of level of tension. But we're not going to dive too deeply into that at the moment. I'm just going to be content with landing on not a root note, and then a root note, to get that kind of shade light kind of pattern that Happy Birthday taught us so marvellously at a young age. So, here we go, let's give it a try. So we'll start with a question. And then answer. And even when we're playing relatively simple stuff, it suddenly sounds like we've got a little bit of shape and a little bit of purpose to what we're doing. However, I fear we might be getting a little bit predictable already, so let's look at another pattern we can use. For our next example, let's remain in childhood for just a moment. Think of this one. Where we start with a classic question and answer pattern. Again, shade and then light. But think of what happens in the next section of that song. Doesn't end on a root note, and then it does it again. It still doesn't land on a root note. Feel how tense it is. And then finally, it's brought home at the end. So what this song can teach us is actually we can venture away from the root note for a little bit longer. We can hold off that resolve, give the listener a bit of delayed gratification. Let's see if we can make that work. Okay, so to show the twinkle twinkle influence on this one, I'm going to begin with a question and then answer phrase, exactly the same as in the last example, but then, following the twinkle twinkle example, I'm going to do 3 question phrases in a row before finally providing an answer phrase at the end. Let's see how that goes. So we've made the listener work for that resolve, but I think they appreciate it all the more for that. For our last example today then, let's see if we can really build some anticipation. Let's consider this tune. Now, it uses the root note within its phrases, but notice how we don't finish on a root note until the very end. So it's essentially not until the end of the 4th phrase until we get any kind of conclusion, any sort of resolve. So what I'm going to try and do now is really build up the anticipation by playing 3 question phrases in a row before finally resolving on the root note at the end. Okay, let's go. And straight away we've kind of got something that feels like it has a little bit of musical purpose, hopefully. Now, you may be pleased to hear that, of course, this doesn't just apply to nursery rhymes. This is every vocal melody you can think of, and obviously every guitar solo you can think of as well. So a really good place to start, if you're new to this, is to have a listen to basically anything by your favourite singer or guitar player, and see if you can start to identify which phrases you might think of as questions and which you might think of as answers. For guitar fans, the usual suspects of Peter Green, David Gilmour, Jeff Beck are particularly good at this kind of thing, so maybe start there if you're stuck for inspiration. But anyway, there's a few ideas for you to try out with phrasing. Really hope there was something of interest there. If so, please do consider liking, commenting, subscribing, blah, blah, blah. And I'll see you with something else very soon. Cheers.